Right, welcome everybody to Policy Exchange. My name is Max Chambers. I head up the Crime and Justice team here at Policy Exchange. About a month ago, we published a report called Future Courts, which looks at the future of the Magistrates Court. The basic premise of the report was that the magistracy could be at risk of terminal decline if particular trends that we've seen over the last decade or so continue. So particularly the proliferation of out-of-court disposals and the reduced business of the court system because of the reductions in crime that we've seen and the court closures that are associated with that. So we wrote our report basically arguing that policymakers need to address that issue head on and take advantage of the fantastic resource that the magistracy represents. And in order to do that, expand their role in a number of quite interesting and quite radical ways. Things like involving magistrates in sentence reviews, things like giving magistrates a bigger role in community engagement, and a host of other things as well. And we're very pleased that Damian Green, since was it last August, has been taking such a huge interest in the issue of the future of the magistracy, holding a review, inviting interesting and innovative ideas. And we're delighted that he's here to update us on the government's thinking this morning. So once we've heard from him, we're also going to hear from Richard Monkhouse, who's the chair of the Magistrates Association. Also somebody who's been, since his appointment, has been very open and engaged with the community, the policymaking community, in thinking about how to take this agenda forward. So in a moment we'll hear from Damian. If you're tweeting, I think the hashtag is Magistrates, so nice and simple. We're due to finish at about 11:15. Plenty of time for Q&A after both of our speakers have spoken. So please give a very warm welcome to the Policing and Criminal Justice Minister, Damian Green.
Thanks very much, Max. Thanks, everyone. And I'm delighted that my thinking is proceeding, as Max has said, in parallel with Policy Exchange. And normally, as a minister, you feel you're being prodded by good think tanks to think new and radical things. But we clearly engaged on this exercise about what to do with and for the magistracy at about the same time. Because, as Max said, it was August last year that I launched the review of the role of the magistracy. The aim was to strengthen that role as part of our wider reforms of the criminal justice system. I want to ensure that we're making full use of the expertise and the unique position of magistrates to help make the whole criminal justice system better and more effective. And I was adamant that we should involve the magistracy as early as possible in shaping any reforms that we might make so that their thoughts and ideas are at the heart of our policy. And our engagement with hundreds of magistrates across the country has helped identify a number of priority areas where we all want to see change, and a vision for the future role of magistrates is beginning to come together. There's clearly still a lot to be done, but I wanted this morning, particularly in the wake of Policy Exchange's very good report, I wanted to share with you my emerging thinking on the areas of reform I'd like to focus on, and particularly where I would like to see change. What I want to do is harness the traditional idea of public service to modern engagement with communities. I'd like the magistracy to be younger and more diverse, particularly in terms of more varied experience. But most importantly, I'd like them to be applying their expertise to a wider range of activities. And it's appropriate, as I say, that I'm doing it here at Policy Exchange, whose own vision for summary justice, future courts, is both timely and radical. It's clear that the magistracy has come a long way since it was established in 1285, coincidentally the year Sir Peter Tapsell first entered the House of Commons, when good and lawful men were commissioned to keep the king's peace. It's obviously faced many changes in recent years, perhaps the most notable being in 2003, following the abolition of magistrates' courts committees and the centralising of the court service. But there is an important thread running through its history, and that's the continued link to the concept of community justice and an individual's right to be tried by their peers. Throughout the centuries, for this very reason, the magistracy epitomises all that we consider to be good and fair about the British justice system. In 2012, magistrates' courts dealt with 19 out of 20 defendants in criminal cases. Magistrates committed only 6% of defendants for trial in the Crown Court that year. And that statistic alone highlights the important part the magistracy has to play in helping us deliver our justice reforms. Despite a constantly changing landscape which has seen local court closures, greater use of out-of-court disposals, and the introduction of neighbourhood justice panels, they have embraced reform. The success of initiatives like Simple, Speedy Summary and Stop Delaying Justice is testament to this. So that's why I want to ensure that we continue to have the right people in place within the magistracy with the right support to help them deal with the challenges of the future. So as a first step, we must stop and reflect on whether the current recruitment and appraisal processes for magistrates will continue to serve us well in the future or perhaps needs to be updated. The introduction of a 10-year tenure for magistrates has been suggested by Policy Exchange and others. And I'm attracted to this idea because it would generate more opportunities for people to volunteer. There's been much discussion about the diversity of the judiciary in recent years, and I don't intend to repeat those arguments in great detail here. Tenure might be one way of boosting diversity, but it needs to be considered in the context of a clear career structure for the magistracy to ensure that we can keep the expertise of magistrates within the criminal justice system once their tenure comes to an end. I can think of a number of areas that would benefit from their particular skills and experience, such as neighbourhood justice panels and local criminal justice partnerships. In addition to tenure, Policy Exchange has also proposed changing work patterns for magistrates to do away with the minimum sitting requirement and stipulate that magistrates must spend a third of their time working in the community. They want to introduce weekend and evening working, which might encourage more applicants who work or study full-time or have childcare responsibilities. I welcome this range of ideas emerging, and I know that some are being considered now by the judiciary as part of their continuing work to modernise the competence, training and appraisal system for the magistracy. In this respect, I'm particularly attracted to the suggestion put forward both by Policy Exchange and the Magistrates Association to encourage more and specialist training among magistrates in areas such as case management, problem-solving techniques and court innovation. And I'll come on to the reasons for that in a minute. I look forward to hearing about the outcome of the senior presiding judge's deliberations, and I'm immensely grateful for the support that he and members of his Magistrates Liaison Group have provided already. Going forward, they will help us assess whether we are making full use of the skills magistrates already have and what skills we'd like to see them develop in the future. Key to this is ensuring that magistrates have a sufficiently challenging and wide-ranging caseload to help develop and maintain the skills and experience they need. A great deal of work is being done to make sure that all cases which should properly be brought before the Magistrates' Court are being brought before the court. There has been a lot of concern, as you know, about the use of out-of-court disposals, and I share that concern. The government has been consulting on this issue. Our aim is to pull together the knowledge, expertise, experience and opinions of policing and criminal justice stakeholders and the public more widely to ensure that out-of-court disposals are as effective, simple and transparent as possible. We need to ensure that any changes made to out-of-court disposals as a result of this consultation are based on full consideration of their potential impact on victims above all, but also on offenders, communities and the criminal justice system. In particular, we're considering how we might build on the vital role magistrates often already play in local scrutiny of out-of-court disposals. It's only right that magistrates should be doing so to ensure that they're used appropriately and help maintain the integrity of the process. In the areas where it's already happening, we are seeing some excellent results. This is a valuable example of magistrates working with other partners to improve outcomes across the criminal justice system. Once cases get to the Magistrates' Court, we need to make sure that they're managed appropriately. So we're working with the Magistrates Association to understand why so many cases sent by magistrates to the Crown Court receive sentences that the Magistrates' Court could have given. Magistrates have the skills, competence and powers to deal with them, and I want to see them doing so. I also want to ensure we're making the best use of magistrates' time. A great deal of it is currently spent simply going through the motions of hearing cases where the defendant has either not responded or entered a guilty plea by post. This can lead to hearings at which paperwork is read aloud by lawyers and advocates, and at which the court announces for its decision and any sentence to an empty courtroom. This is disproportionate, expensive, and quite simply wasteful. That's why we're introducing legislation in the Criminal Justice and Courts Bill to remove low-level regulatory cases from traditional courtrooms. Cases which a single magistrate sitting alone with their legal advisor could quite easily deal with. This will allow magistrates to focus their time in court on more serious, contested cases which best use their skills. That's important for their job satisfaction, and it's important to me that magistrates are spending more time dealing with the cases that directly affect their communities. I'd also like to see magistrates play a greater role in reducing reoffending. You'll know the unacceptably high reoffending rates, particularly among those serving custodial sentences of less than 12 months, are one of the government's biggest priorities. The Offender Rehabilitation Act 2014 will give magistrates' courts new powers to deal with offenders who fail to comply with their supervision conditions, including being able to commit an offender to custody for up to 14 days. And I believe there are many more opportunities for expanding the role of magistrates in this area. At present, 69% of young offenders released from custody reoffend within 12 months. In January, we set out the radical steps we're taking to transform youth custody and place education at the heart of youth detention. We're also taking steps to build on any progress made in custody to ensure that when a young offender is released, more effective plans are in place to support their reintegration into the community. We're exploring a number of options, including what role magistrates could play in helping to ensure that resettlement plans for young people are a success. Work is also going on to consider other areas of the criminal justice which might benefit from magistrate skills and expertise, such as monitoring youth diversionary programmes. And we're also looking at the potential for magistrates to get involved in the rehabilitation of adult offenders, including sentence supervision and the review of community orders. There are many options we can consider, compatible with their role as judicial office holders, to enhance and expand the workload of magistrates and help to strengthen the depth and range of their skills and experience. But in doing so, we must ensure that magistrates feel properly valued. Concerns were expressed during our discussions with magistrates about the role of district judges in magistrates' courts, whose role is perceived by some as taking work that magistrates could and should be doing. I want to tackle head-on the suggestion that I've heard more than once that there is a plan to replace magistrates with district judges. It is simply not the case. District judges and magistrates bring different but equally valuable skills to our justice system. This is not about competition, but ensuring we make the best use of those skills in a way that makes the criminal justice system more effective. In particular, magistrates have a distinctive role as members of the community dispensing justice for and on behalf of that community. Magistrates are in a unique position because they can reach out to communities in a way that other members of the judiciary can't. The excellent work they do on projects like Magistrates in the Community and the National Mock Trial Competition serve to illustrate that, and the Magistrates Association deserves a lot of credit for running these initiatives. And I was very concerned in our consultation to hear from magistrates who feel that their community work is undervalued. Some feel increasingly disengaged from local decision-making and from local criminal justice agencies. We need to address this as a priority. Magistrates can help to strengthen the links between courts, communities and the wider justice system. I think it's time we recognise this as an important part of their job. In fact, we think it's so important, we're currently reviewing the selection criteria for magistrates in consultation with the senior judiciary and other interested parties, with a view to emphasise the importance of candidates being able to demonstrate a well-rounded knowledge and understanding of the social issues affecting the area in which they're applying to serve. We shouldn't underestimate the vital role magistrates play in building public confidence and a better understanding of how the justice system works. They help ensure that justice doesn't become too remote from the people it's there to protect. And they can also have an impact in helping deter young people in communities away from crime. An excellent example of this is Your Life You Choose, a multi-agency initiative which has been driven by magistrates in Ealing. This delivers a one-day presentation to pupils in local schools aimed at deterring young people from a life of crime by making them aware of the consequences of crime, not only to themselves if they become offenders, but also the effects it will have on their parents, friends and victims. What's so impressive about this campaign is the way it presents so clearly the likely consequences for those who make the wrong choice. And official figures demonstrate that it's really having an impact. We should be making much better use of magistrates' knowledge of their communities and their links to local agencies. At a time of local court closures, their skills in this area matter more than ever. One of the questions I asked back at the launch of the review last August was how can we ensure that magistrates are in the driving seat of improving performance of the justice system in their local communities? Which is why I was particularly struck by the ideas put forward by Policy Exchange about community justice. Policy Exchange recommends that magistrates could have an important role in the development of what they call more effective local community justice infrastructures. It's a snappy phrase there, Max. These would be better able to address lower level offending and dispense summary justice more flexibly, efficiently and effectively. We certainly need to ensure that there is some coherence between the work of the courts, neighbourhood justice panels and out-of-court disposal scrutiny panels. Our aim should be to provide a swift and proportionate response to offending to help tackle the crimes that really matter to our communities and increase public confidence. An important element of community-based justice is the emphasis on local discretion. It enables criminal justice agencies to work together to tailor their approach and develop strategies for addressing local problems. Magistrates' courts should be at the centre of such strategies, and magistrates are in the perfect position to use their local knowledge and contacts to help courts develop productive relationships with local agencies and play a key role in local criminal justice partnerships. Of course, the court's primary role must be to dispense justice, but they also have a key role in cutting reoffending. I'd like to see them more focused on solving problems and working with local agencies to help change the behaviour of offenders. Court outcomes should be an important part of their job and can be improved. And I'd like to explore these proposals further, including whether it would be possible and desirable to devise data which would enable magistrates' courts to monitor and compare reoffending rates and monitor their performance. This would help them identify good practice and share that information with other courts. It would also help inform and assist in the evaluation of local crime strategies. I completely agree with the view that we shouldn't impose ideas and models top-down from the centre, but should instead provide local practitioners with the autonomy and discretion they need to devise their own new and innovative ways of improving performance and identifying and addressing their own problems. We should be encouraging new ways of problem solving and reforming court procedures and processes to improve efficiency and effectiveness. And at a national level, the Criminal Justice Board is doing just that. We've been supporting magistrates' courts and local criminal justice agencies to identify the best and most effective practices from across all criminal justice areas which help achieve effective first hearings. From these, we've developed a comprehensive improvement model covering issues such as file preparation, listing and exchange of papers and bailing patterns, which will be rolled out in all areas. Implementation will be driven by local criminal justice partnerships and will provide them with information to help monitor improvements in their performance. I believe that this project has an excellent chance of success simply because it's based on good practice which is already out there and which practitioners are telling us works. So I want to consider what more we can do to support effective local partnership working and in particular local innovation so that we can help drive the kind of thinking that will encourage local agencies to develop their own successful local community justice and court models. Our magistracy has a distinct and important part to play in delivering better justice. I want to ensure they consider to feel valued and respected for what they do and that their skills and knowledge are used to their full potential. Half of the currently serving magistrates will have retired within 10 years. We know that crime is falling and workloads in magistrates' courts are falling as well. So we need to do some thinking now about how we will manage the decline in numbers and how we will ensure that when we need to recruit more magistrates, we attract the right number of people from as diverse a range of backgrounds as possible with the right experience and skills to continue to serve local communities well. In order to do that, we need to be clear about what we're expecting of them and how we see their work changing in the future. I'm confident that those changes will help to fully establish their role and will have a positive impact on the efficiency and effectiveness of our courts, on reoffending and on wider public confidence in the criminal justice system. So we'll continue to engage with magistrates as this work progresses. More detailed proposals will be included in the revised Criminal Justice Strategy and Action Plan, which will be published in late spring, and I intend to publish a white paper in the summer setting out the full extent of our proposed reforms. Contributions to that will be very welcome for everyone. Everyone has a role to play in developing this policy, so I will welcome the continued dialogue to contribute to this very, very important reform of our justice system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damian. I think taken together, that would really represent quite a radical and exciting future direction for the magistracy. And something that would undoubtedly make the role of being a magistrate much more interesting, varied, and probably fulfilling as well. So let's hear if the chair of the Magistrates Association, Richard Monkhouse, agrees with that and his view on the future of magistrates.
Well, thank you, Minister. My colleagues from the MA will be greatly relieved to hear that I am going to be brief. We're very pleased to have been involved in these discussions, and we're very pleased to hear that they're going to be ongoing. And I think the thing that we like most of all about these is that they are bottom-up rather than top-down. I think some years ago, HMCS imposed a community engagement programme from the top down, and it now lies in tatters, except in those areas where magistrates and the community is really strong, and where they effectively took it over. So we're very keen on some of these proposals, and we want to look forward rather than backwards. 3 years ago, the MA, in celebrating 650 years of the first appointment of a JP, embarked on a programme around the country, and we came out with the conclusion that magistrates should be active, accessible, engaged. It appears we're now all talking the same language. The government's talking that language, Policy Exchange are talking that language, so are other organisations. I notice Phil Bowen here, he's talking the same language. We need to move forward and look forward to a much more sensible way of delivering summary justice. And this is what happens when people talk across different channels of the justice system. We start coming up with the same ideas. Instead of being imposed, ideas being imposed that are actually sensible in theory, but actually impractical in practice. This is what happens. So it's a welcome step. And also, it's right that JPs are regarded as justice professionals. There's a new acronym for you. Not just volunteers. This shows the trust and the faith in who we are and in the work that we do. The opportunities exist for tidying up the bottom end and making it more That's the less serious end. Making it more efficient, making it more practical. Things like the out-of-court disposal reviews, which we worked on for so long to try and get some light at the end of the tunnel. And that light is at the end of the tunnel, and we now realise it's not an oncoming train. Scrutiny panels. We know that in some areas they're working really well. In some areas they maybe need a little bit of tweaking. But in some areas, I will particularly mention Cheshire, they're working extremely well. So simpler methods for less serious offences. But what else could happen? This gives us the opportunity to develop the more serious end of the justice system. Better supervision of offenders, resettlement of young offenders. Those people at the foot of the ladder who, unless we deal with them properly, and we deal with their offending behaviour, nothing's going to change and they're going to become the adult offenders of the future. Rehabilitation of adult offenders. Case reviews. We only ever see the breaches. Like a colleague of ours said at our first all-party parliamentary group a couple of weeks ago, it's a bit like being a surgeon and operating on someone, shoving them along the line, never seeing what happens to them, never seeing whether that treatment is actually effective, but along comes the next one. We need to have more involvement in that. We need to know what works. Because although the system is about victims, if we don't treat offenders properly, there are going to be more and more victims, and that's actually not what we want to achieve. I can't miss the opportunity for also suggesting that a great saving could be done if we were given 12-month sentencing, but I'll pause there, I won't go on. Finally, magistrates in the community. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. Local justice by the community, for the community. It's a catchphrase that's been there for 20, 30 years. It's been losing its value recently. And I think we need to re-establish that. 3,000-4,000 volunteer magistrates go out and talk to thousands of people every year about the criminal justice system and how it works in all sorts of ways, from the age of 10 to the age of 90 plus. These are the sorts of things that we need to get into the community. And this emphasises our community role. We would simply like fewer obstacles and challenges in our way and a greater opportunity to educate. So all in all, we are greatly happy that these discussions are taking place. It will be interesting to see what the white paper produces in the summer, but then we have that opportunity. We in the Magistrates Association, the National Bench Chairman's Forum, magistrates all over the country have that opportunity to put in our ideas from the bottom up. What actually works? What do we think we could be doing better to make the criminal justice system work better and to reduce offending? Because after all, that's why we're all here. Thank you.
Right, let's open it up to questions. There's a mic coming round, so please give your name and organisation and please keep the questions snappy. Go to the back first. Sorry, Katie.
Thank you. Robert Kay, Law Society. Just wanted to run quickly two possible policies. One was raised during this speech. Magistrate sentencing powers. The last Conservative manifesto said that magistrate sentencing powers would be increased from 6 months to 12 months. The legislation is already there. It's on the statute, but it hasn't been implemented. Would that be something that you would consider to enable more cases to be heard by magistrates rather than transferred to the Crown Court? Secondly, I know the government is concerned about the number of women in the criminal justice system. Something like a quarter to a third of all cases of women defendants in the magistrates' courts are charged under the Wireless Telegraphy Act. One simple way to reduce the number of women in the criminal justice system would be to decriminalise non-payment of the TV licence fee and treat it like other utilities. Where are we with that policy?
On the first question, as you say, we've been thinking about increasing the sentencing powers for some time. There are two reasons for not coming to a final decision at the moment. The first is to allow the transforming rehabilitation measures to get in. The priority is to make sure that now we're actually giving people who got short sentences some rehabilitation in prison for the first time, and also for 12 months after they've served their prison term. That's the priority, so let's do that first. And secondly, we are engaged with work at the moment about why 40% of the cases that are referred up to Crown Court needn't have been when the ultimate sentence. So I think we need to delve beneath the surface yet before we come to a final decision on that. So we're still thinking about that. And on Wireless Telegraphy Act, I have no sort of private insight other than what you've read in this morning's papers. You've seen there is legislation afoot, and that's proceeding through its course.
Richard, could we get a view on the second point, on the TV licence point? Do you have a particular view? Does the MA take a position?
We've been arguing for this for the last 20 years. We've been saying it's a nonsense that this is the only utility that has this way of dealing with non-payment of whatever the utility is providing. I sat in court on Friday, and I know I shouldn't talk about particular cases, but there was a woman before us who had a long-standing fine, and our only threat of sanction was to threaten imprisonment. We didn't, but we imposed a suspended sentence on the basis that she carried on paying. But actually, more women are being presented in the courts. It's disproportionately working against women, and we think actually it should stop.
Okay, we'll take another question. Bernard, down at the front.
Bernard Ricks from COPAC. I live in Biggleswade, East Bedfordshire. Our magistrate court is closed. Our local one is Bedford, which I understand is also at risk, which would mean that our local magistrate court would be Luton. How do you achieve local justice whilst there's a shrinking number of magistrate court centres? And how do you answer challenges that local justice leads to undesirable postcode justice?
I think the point about local justice is one of the things Richard and I have been discussing for months now, is whether every case needs to be heard in a traditional magistrates court with three people sitting there, and as I discussed in my speech, with a completely empty courtroom there, and a ritual is gone through in private among legal practitioners, which doesn't dispense justice any more effectively and openly than it would be if it was done in some other building. So I don't want to get hung up on the buildings. There are, as you know, we've for instance started having traffic courts, specialist traffic courts 1 day a week. Now that can happen in a magistrates court building. It could happen in some other building. I don't think localism equates to buildings. In terms of whether if you localise the sort of delivery of justice, then what you end up is with different laws in different parts of the country. That's why you have sentencing guidelines and the vast national panoply of perfectly correct guidelines and legislation, indeed, in the ultimate, to make sure that people are operating within the lines which society as a whole has decided is acceptable. But I don't think that needs to equate with stopping every initiative, not allowing people to experiment with, not least with finding out the information of how effective they are. I mean, the point I was making about getting the data about reoffending rates, it would be really interesting and valuable to know whether in Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire maybe there are different reoffending rates from people who've gone through the court system, because if we know that, then we can do something about it, and it's the sort of thing PCCs will take an interest in. So I think that's quite a creative way forward.
I don't really have very much to say on that, except that local justice are two different things, whether you come from a major city like I did and the country, more rural areas. I know that in somewhere like Greater Manchester, the court estate could be rationalised without anybody losing out. I think that's much more difficult in somewhere like Cumbria, Devon, Wales, these sorts of places. But there is some rationalisation that could take place without victims, witnesses and magistrates actually suffering that much.
Worth saying, of course, in our report, our calculations showed that the court service has got to save 38% in operating costs between 2012 and 2016. So our view, it's inevitable that this rationalisation is going to continue, and the real question is what you do at that very local level, and how you manage to keep magistrates where benches know each other, work together, and are still able to sit together. Next question, down at the front.
Yvonne Powell, Chairman of the National Bench Chairs Forum. Localism doesn't depend on the court building, but it does depend on local knowledge. And I wonder if you could look, Minister, at the selection process, as you say you're going to review it, about magistrates, because at the moment, a magistrate, and they are, apply to sit in courts in Yorkshire when they live in London, or they apply to sit in a court living in Wiltshire. There is nothing in the legislation to stop them doing that. And of course, the selection process is based on merit. And HMCTS has to pick up the travelling bills.
That's an extremely good point, and is one of the many contributory factors as to why we're looking at the selection process. So that, as I say, that the ultimate thing one values is the local knowledge, the engagement with the community. So if the selection process isn't promoting that, then, as I say, that's a good reason to look at the selection process. I agree with that point.
Okay, just next to you.
Yes, Caroline Johnston, South Western Bench. We had a community court in 2008 in South Western, and we had Section 178 reviews, which we found very effective in preventing reoffending. That community court was closed down. Is that model going to be used in the future? Have the success of those community courts been considered? That's one main question. And the second question is, now, you know, that original bench has merged with 3 other benches. And how does local justice, going back to the earlier point, local justice?
Thank you. So community courts.
I think, I mean, in a sense, I don't want to get hung up on names as well, but I mean, the concept of that type of activity is precisely the sort of thing we're looking to, you know, whether neighbourhood justice panels or so on, and actually having the expertise and local knowledge that magistrates have injected into the whole process of deciding legal redress at the lower end of the spectrum is precisely what all of this is about. So one perhaps should never be afraid of reinventing the wheel, is because wheels work. All ideas gratefully received, as I said.
Richard, on the point about problem-solving justice in Section 178, how can you, as the Magistrates Association, or how can central government try and develop an even more innovative culture within the magistracy in terms of sharing problem-solving knowledge, understanding how you do those sentence reviews in the best way? How can you try and help spread that knowledge that we've seen work so well in places like Red Hook and other courts in the States and elsewhere?
I think, firstly, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be done at a ground level. I know one of the first court was Liverpool. Salford then picked it up. Salford was then merged with Manchester, and a lot of that progress was lost. Sitting in our little court in Trafford in Greater Manchester, we were doing it on a shoestring, and actually are still doing it on a shoestring, involving agencies, signposting people, particularly those people who are not going to trouble the probation service, and yet that's 70% of the people we see. Many of those still have chaotic lives. Many of those would benefit from being seen again and again. As I said before, we only ever see them when they breach. So it doesn't have to be an expensive routine. It doesn't actually. Case reviews don't actually have to be done in a courtroom. If all you're doing is reviewing the case, then you can do those anytime, anywhere. I mean, it has to be a sensible place. It's only when you're looking at revoking the sentence or changing the sentence that it has to come back to the courtroom. So I think we have to be innovative. And I think taking the lead from those smaller courts, I know the Justice Select Committee have just taken a trip up to Greater Manchester to watch the progress in one, and came back and were saying, this is wonderful, why aren't we doing this all over the country? So it's not about cost, it's about giving that power back to the magistracy, back to the sentencers, to say we need and we can do that. And I'm sorry that your court's gone, because
it was very effective.
absolutely.
Like, so the problems with payment of fine, there was a payment fine person
Yep.
on hand,
Yep.
there was an alcohol person on hand, there was a drug person on hand. So when we asked how things were progressing with drug or alcohol, they were referred to a person in court that didn't have to go to probation. It was inexpensive.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Phil.
Phil Bowen from the Centre for Justice Innovation. Just kind of picking up that theme and some of the themes that you talked about in terms of inspiring a new generation of court innovation. In our work, we've looked at exactly that issue, and I think the two biggest barriers are, one, a sense to which central government doesn't extend a permission culture, that you can go and try something new and test it out. And then secondly, the sort of evidence bar can be quite high. So even in examples like some of the community courts that had process evaluations done on them, but not outcome studies. And that's kind of seen as, because there's no concrete evidence, therefore we can't continue. When actually what we experienced was we just haven't had the time or the money to do the evidence. And I just wanted you to comment on those barriers to that sort of local court innovation.
I mean, I think that there are inevitably, I completely agree, there are inevitably barriers for central organisations who don't want to let sort of the reins loose for good and bad reasons. But absolutely, I want to develop a culture inside the Ministry of Justice as well as inside the criminal justice system more generally, where if there are good ideas or if there are local examples of things that work, then A, let's know about them and encourage them, and B, let's spread that best practice, that actually it's much more likely to pick up and last if you know it already works. And there are people can sit in Whitehall and think grand schemes and have great ideas, some of them are very good ideas, but it doesn't have a monopoly of wisdom.
Next question, Penelope, just behind you.
P. Gibbs from Transform Justice. Both Policy Exchange and Transform Justice have looked at the data on who magistrates are, and the occupation data suggests that magistrates, probably as ever, are predominantly middle class. Is class a diversity issue you're looking at, and what plans do you have to broaden the diversity of the magistracy in terms of class?
Well, it's part of the, as I said, what I want is to have as wide a range of expertise as possible, and obviously people who can represent their communities. I don't want to appear in any way to discourage anyone from applying to be a magistrate, so I don't want to put new barriers down. I think, as I said, one of the beneficial side effects of looking at different things magistrates can do and different commitments they have to make will be to make the magistracy more available as a volunteering option for a wider range of people, and that applies on any potential diversity measure you can make, and that seems to me to be the constructive way forward to making sure that in every community we have benches that are more representative of that particular community.
Anything to add?
And I would just again applaud the work that magistrates in the community does. Part of the problem is lack of knowledge, and if we can increase that knowledge, not only with the public, but with the media, with parliamentarians, with everybody, as to how the system actually works, not how the system is thought to work, how the system actually works, that can draw people in. But we have to get out to them. It's no good sitting waiting for people to come to us, because they won't. We have to go out into them, and that's why the work of the MA in its educational area, magistrates in the community, I think is so valuable and is so underrated.
Okay, we'll take a few more questions. Gentleman here, and then the lady there.
Richard Huckle, magistrate from Surrey. Really following on from the last 2 points, I'm an employed magistrate, and I just about managed to meet the minimum requirements of sittings. So I welcome the opportunity to do more by way of weekend and out of hours activities. But if magistrates like me are to be involved and others to be encouraged who are employed, that other work needs to be recognised as part of the core rather than just the pure 26 sittings that we're all currently measured by. Is that the plan?
That's very much part of the thinking, because obviously if you have a more diverse range of responsibilities, then showing that you're competent to fulfill those responsibilities has in itself to be more diverse than in the past. So yes, absolutely, and I'm glad to hear that in practical terms we have a real life example of someone here who would benefit from these sorts of changes. So good, thank you.
Very good. Lady here.
Hello, Anita Morgan. I'm the chairman of the North London Bench, which is a bench of 300 magistrates. And as you'll be aware, bench chairmen manage the personnel of their benches. And I've been hearing, and I welcome, obviously, an increased role for magistrates, but I'm wondering who is to manage all these people. I have a feeling of my magistrates being and operating in a number of settings. And it will be to magistrates, I'm afraid middle-class old codgers like me who are retired, who have the time to manage them, or do you have some other management model in mind?
Richard?
Well, I think the simple answer is no, but we wish we did. We've been pushing the idea of CPD, which broadens the concept. I sat on Friday afternoon in a council tax court with 2 other people. What they added to the criminal justice system or what it added to their competence, I don't know. The more we insist that we are based purely on numbers of sittings and not on the other things we do, like the bench chairman role, like the TDC role, like the MIC role, all of those things need to be valued, because when we're involved in those, we're actually more involved almost in the process than we are sitting in court. We've got to think outside that box that's the courtroom and value people for what they are. We've got to do skills audits. We've got to increase our knowledge of who we have in among our constituency. We really do.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I mean, where are you going to find a person who has the time to do it? I would say managing my bench in a time of merger has been a full-time job. I would say 30 or 40 hours a week.
Some of the...
Where are you going to find the people who are going to do that?
Some of the basic management actually is still tremendously old-fashioned. If I can sort of step back into the wider criminal justice reform, particularly the creation of the common platform and technology, actually one of the first tools that we're going to have on that will enable magistrates to volunteer for the sessions that you say when they're available online. So there are large swathes of basic management that has to go on now that doesn't need to go on, that in advanced areas of the world, you don't have paper and phone calls and things like that anymore. So we'll get towards that. So that will remove some of the day-to-day admin.
Yeah, I don't do any of that. That is all done elsewhere.
Yeah.
It is managing people's expectations, managing people who aren't sitting enough, managing people who are... There are a whole range of problems, managing their personnel problems, managing their expectations about where they're sitting. There's a whole world out there of dealing with people with personnel. I'm a personnel manager of 300 people.
I think that's where the relationship between the MA and the National Bench Chairman's Forum is a very valuable relationship. When I was a bench chairman 10 years ago, it was very different. The whole thing has changed. But I think we need to work together. We can work together. And I'm sure we can come up. I'm sure it's not beyond the water to come up. And understand that. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Last couple of questions. Gentleman at the back's been waiting for a while. Thanks, Katie.
My name's Brian Higgins. I sit in East London. I've been on the bench for about 8.5 years. I'd like to endorse my colleague's point about employed magistrates just recently made. I'm one too, and there are several in the room. It is very difficult to maintain the minimum amount of sittings these days, but we do it because we're invested in the role. I have, however, been doing a little bit of mental arithmetic back here on the idea of tenure. If you take a bog standard private sector contract, one's expected to work a roughly 260 days a year, the rest being annual leave, etc. If you take the minimum amount of sittings required by the Lord Chancellor for a magistrate, that's 13 days a year, which over 10 years of tenure would be 130, which equates to 6 months of, I can't believe I'm using this phrase because the government love it so much, real-time work. Do you think that if you're committed to having a bench, national bench of people who have the competencies necessary to fulfill the role, that cutting them off after 6 months of actual work is going to meet those requirements?
Well, that's assuming 2 things. First of all, that everyone would only do the minimum number of sittings, which is clearly not ideal. And secondly, I mean, the whole thrust of what I'm saying is that we want to develop a wider range of things that magistrates do. That at the moment, what magistrates do is sit in a courtroom in a group of 3 people and hear lots of cases. And I want them to do a lot more than that, because I think you've all got the talents and skills and... Well, no, it's the tenure. That would be the sitting. The point would be, and this is something, I mean, talk to the Magistrates Association, it's something that Richard and his team have come up with, that actually it would be good to have a sort of career structure. I appreciate career structure may be the wrong phrase for volunteers, but actually to do different things, to develop different skills, so that you can take the expertise from one area to another through the course of many years as a magistrate.
I think part of the motivation as well for the tenure thought is that we want to try and avoid a situation happening again in the future where we've got a completely static recruitment situation where there's no opportunity for people who want to volunteer to become magistrates. There's no throughput, and that means that things can get a bit stayed, and people need to be moving through this system, progressing, doing different things, and coming through at the front end as well. Richard, do you have anything?
I repeat the phrase I use, we've got to think outside the box that's the courtroom. There are other things that we could do beforehand. We could be involved with young offenders beforehand. I'm a retired youth magistrate. I really miss it. The work that I could do with youth offending services to help people who are not young people, who don't come into the court process, but who are diverted from the court process, there's some value there. Do I need to be a regular sitting magistrate to do that? Probably not.
How do you get to be a half-decent youth magistrate if you can only sit 10 years in the first 4 months and don't have to be in the other?
Absolutely. When I was a youth magistrate, there were plenty of sittings. They've dropped off, so I no longer sit as a youth magistrate. But actually, it's such a valuable... If you think that's where the core of adult offenders come from, if young people are not dealt with properly, how are we going to prevent them going on to be adult offenders? There's work that could be done. It's a work in progress. There's an awful lot we've got to think about. There is certainly nothing fixed, but there are all sorts of opportunities. But at the moment, somebody becomes a magistrate, is sworn in, suddenly they're a magistrate. When they get to 70, they're now no longer a magistrate. And that workload is exactly the same throughout that process. Actually, there are other things. There are other things that we could do outside the courtroom that could develop magistrates, case reviews, sentence and supervision, all of those sorts of things, because the aim of the exercise is actually to stop people offending. And that's not just done in the courthouse.
Right, we'll take one more question, and I know the Minister has to dash off down at the front. Gentleman here.
Eric Windsor, formerly MBCF chairman, but a magistrate in North Shropshire. I'm a little bit worried. Magistrates say to me, we are not getting enough sittings, we are not getting enough practice. The primary objective of most of us when we became a magistrate was to sit in court and dispense justice one way or the other. I'm a little bit concerned that if magistrates are expected, in inverted commas, going to be asked to do other things outside of court, they may lose some of the practice of actually sitting in court and may become that little bit further detached from such things as sentencing guidelines. In addition to that, doing things outside of court and the extras that are being talked about, is there any need that magistrates do this?
Well, I think it's helpful that magistrates do it, because magistrates have the particular raft of skills and expertise and experience that they bring. I think the worry that in some ways magistrates will be taken away from courts gives rise to the underlying point that if you have falling crime and therefore falling numbers of people appearing in front of the magistrates' courts, then one thing you can do is just drastically cut the number of magistrates so that everyone is getting enough sittings. But I don't want to do that, because I think there's this enormous wellspring of really, really valuable initiatives, people who want to help in this particular area. And I absolutely don't want to suppress that. So I think it's a more forward-looking and creative way to deal with this, say, well, what else can they do that are related to, but not necessarily a traditional part of magistrates' activities? And you know, that's what we're working on, and that's what other parts of the system are working on as well. Because, as I say, the monopoly of wisdom will not lie within the department, and I'm sure that between us we can come up with some creative solutions that allow us to tap into that wellspring of enthusiasm and expertise.
Last word, Richard.
I think just we've got to remember that the court isn't there for our benefit. We are there for the court's benefit. And I think we need to extend that a bit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to Richard for his excellent contribution. And thank you to Damian for such a great speech. There's clearly a huge amount of interesting thinking going on in this area, and we look forward to the white paper in the summer. And thank you all for coming as well.